Coming up on the live and interactive ACSA Legislative Lunch Break, Edgar and I will get you all of your latest news and information from the state capitol and CDE with an in-depth analysis of how it impacts your school community. Plus, we are talking about all of the successes and challenges inside the state capitol at the latest legislative session.
The ACSA Legislative Lunch Break starts now.
And it is just after 1 o'clock. We welcome you on a Wednesday to the ACSA Legislative Lunch Break, along with ACSA's Executive Director, Dr. Edgar Zazwata. I'm Naj Ali Khan, ACSA's Senior Director of Marketing and Communications. Welcome. Go ahead and jump into our chat. Say hello. Let us know where you're watching from today. Edgar, how are you?
Good. I see you. You worked on your intro this week. You nailed it.
Right there. I had to literally put a piece of paper.
Had to write it down.
I toyed with the idea, and finally I had to do it.
I'm doing good, Naj. It's good to be back here this week. I'm excited for our guest, my old friends there that I feel like I don't get to see that often anymore in government relations. So it'll be good talking to members of my old team there. And then our members, this is an exciting part of the year, as we've been talking about the last couple of weeks. Still very much in back to school mode. You see by the day, some schools have been back on for a few weeks. Others by the day, you see people celebrating, the first days of school. I love on social media when our members and just educators in general post the number of years this makes. And I saw, and I won't call these people out, but I saw 37th first day of school. I think I saw a 39th first day of school. And then, so that I always appreciate it. It's an exciting time of year. And I know our folks are obviously working very hard with the beginning of the school year.
Yeah. And before we go into our news today, I do want to make mention, and I think you and I have both been noticing this, that it appears to be some kind of a competition on our comment section today about who could get in first. So Sheldon Smith was on first today, and then Neri Pais came on, and then Ellen Wheeler came on, and I believe Lester Powell came on, all before we even came on the air today. It was almost like a competition. So thanks to all of you for jumping on before the show even started. Also, Mark Campbell, Grant Bennett on with us today, Marie Russell over at Turlock Unified, and Deanna makes mention that we are 10 days away from college football, which is great, Edgar, because that gives us a whole new path to be giving each other a hard time here on the show, which I'm always looking forward to.
Yes, I that always gives us some more fodder there for back and forth. And I appreciate the people jumping on, early. I know we were joking before the start of the show about that there should be, and I know you really want to be, going back to your TV days, but maybe you wanted to be a radio host, and seventh caller gets free tickets or something. I know we're talking about maybe we have to throw some legislative lunch break swag there at the first person who jumps on, or for our 11th caller, however you want to go about it.
Something like that. Definitely for ACSA Leadership Summit, which is coming up in San Diego that first week of November. Let's hit a couple of news headlines, and then we'll move into our legislative focus today. And Edgar, we want to pass along the latest information from CDC, new COVID guidelines, and how that plays here in California. So on Friday of last week, the CDC came out with new COVID guidelines that are largely loosening virus protocols and leaving much of the decision-making to individuals and local officials. Let me just give you a few bullets here. Universal indoor masking is recommended in nearly half the country. The CDC calls on students and staff members to wear well-fitting masks at schools if they live in communities where COVID-19 community transmission levels are high. The agency no longer recommends routine testing in K through 12 schools unless COVID-19 community transmission levels are high in that area. And when it comes to testing, the new guidelines also make no distinction between vaccinated or unvaccinated people. And similar to the routine testing, the CDC is no longer advising students or staff members who are exposed to the virus to quarantine. Edgar, your thoughts on this and how this plays in California?
Yeah, much of this wasn't a surprise. I mean, the state had already kind of been moving in the direction while still awaiting to see what modifications the CDC would make, and I would imagine there may be some other tweaks that have to be made to the CDPH guidance as a result of what came out. This last piece that you said, Naj, is probably the most. Uh, I think the piece that folks probably make note of, or I think has the most impact in terms of there being no distinction. So again, CDC doesn't ask for a distinction between vaccinated and unvaccinated students when it comes to testing. We already have that in California. CDPH, as you folks might remember, one of the iterations of the changes, we already moved in that direction. I would say the flip side of that is probably the place that we probably get the most questions. We say this every week, gets still the most amount of attention, is the distinction that California is still making, not when it comes to students, but when it comes to employees, where the CDC is no longer recommending regular testing in schools, in terms of that they're not saying they're not making a distinction between vaccinated and unvaccinated. As folks know, here in the state, that order that went into effect October 15th of, I think now we're a year and a half since that, almost 2 years, they still say that employees that are unvaccinated have to test on a regular basis. So this was a conversation I think we had last week. We talked with the governor's office a few weeks ago. So I do wonder, they heard from our members, our superintendents, to be clear. They had a meeting with the governor's office, and I know folks were very adamant that, look, all the other guidance seems to be going in a particular direction. Why are you still requiring it? In some communities, this is still a big obstacle. It's a big hurdle in terms of employees. And CDC now, on top of that, is now they're no longer recommended in either. So it does make me wonder, this be the final push that the state needs in order to finally get away from that rule that we've had in place here for school employees for some time? So that was a lot of this, again, what the conversation we had last week, their recommendations, there's still the recommendations about masking and whatnot, but there's no requirements, and they've never been requirements from the CDC. They were giving us suggestions, but the state has looked to see what the federal government has suggested, and usually aligned. So I will wonder if this will mean further changes on that vaccinator test requirement in the weeks to come.
Yeah, certainly something to keep your mind on. Want to make sure we acknowledge Stephen Hovey, who is now, as he says, high from Retirementville. First year since 1970 that he's not a public school educator. So, Stephen, congratulations on that.
You got to admire Steve. Like, many folks is like, I'm tired of this. I don't want to be listening to this nonsense about the state or what. I guess, and we always joke with our members that our folks maybe sometimes do less than great at retirement, but yeah. I do appreciate how connected all of our folks want to stay to what's going on and, and what's happening with the system. It's not easy to just walk away, but hopefully, Steve, wish you the best. Hopefully you are finding, in addition to watching the legislative lunch break, finding some time there to enjoy your retirement.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, let me make mention of one other thing, because this is related to teacher shortage, educator shortage. LA Unified Superintendent Alberto Carvalho, who will be one of our guests at the 2022 ACSA Leadership Summit coming up in November, also brand new ACSA member, was on CBS's Face the Nation this past weekend. And he gave a couple of answers related to the teacher shortage. I just want to pass these along, and then Edgar, I'll have you respond. Margaret Brennan, who is the anchor of Face the Nation, asked the question, to mitigate the shortage, you've given out incentive grants, but also something called alternative certification programs where teachers can go into the classroom before they fully completed their own credentialing in the field. She asked, does that sound like you're lowering standards? And he says, no, these are fully credentialed individuals. And I'll just read this quote. They have a bachelor's or master's degree. They may not have yet that state certification, but they do have the course content already done. They may be missing a specific exam, but for the very first time in over a decade, we are fully staffed going into August 15th, the very first day of school. We were able to hire in excess of 1,500 teachers. During the summer months, we partnered with colleges and universities, and we cast a wide net for recruitment. We offered incentives, And last but not least, we've embraced this concept of micro-credentialing to accelerate the hiring of qualified teachers for our students. Here's the thing, Edgar, that really stuck out to me from that quote. In the interview, I would suggest you go and see it. For the very first time in over a decade, we are fully staffed going into August 15th, and they have used some methods to hire in excess of 1,500 teachers, including a micro-credentialing and they finished the coursework, but now they're waiting for the credentialing for that specific exam. Edgar, it's really another example of how districts are working to try and confront that challenge of educator shortage. And in LA Unified, they've done enough, at least up to this point, that they can fill every classroom, which is a great story.
Well, first of all, I have to say it's great that individuals like Superintendent Carvalho are getting on this national profile, right? Getting interviewed on Face the Nation is not to represent not only Los Angeles but the state of California. That's great to see. I think too, it does show. I mean, one of the things he kind of spelled out in his initial 100-day plan is trying to really tackle this whole notion of making sure that they had educators, that they had teachers that were credentialed in every classroom. And then, by your account, seems like they're doing a good job. They're having to be creative, and they're really having to pull on all the strings with community partners and whatnot. But it does show that we almost have to think outside the box to make sure to meet these objectives. So I think that's good news. I think the flip side of that, I think we have to be mindful that a lot of diversity in the state, and not all places are LA. And I know we hear this a lot of times in some of the rural areas where they may not have as access to the same population, may not have the universe of folks who have the requirements. And I think this is where we have to continue to push on that end. But it is good. It is good to show that there has been progress, that the superintendent met some of those early objectives. I saw Nettie's comment in the chat. I think it's also a reminder that even though we may be past, I think, the worst parts of the pandemic, the worker shortage, the educator shortage, none of this is being resolved overnight, that this is going to take some work. So in the absence of just creating a new pipeline, the state, there is a role for the state, right? And Nettie talks about trying to give some extension of some of that flexibility with retirees. And I think it's something the state should continue to think about. We get this question all the time about, is there more the state is able to give us as we're starting the school year? Because folks are coming back to this year and realizing that they just don't have the staff. I know Michael was having conversations with our members just yesterday on the show focused on educator burnout. And this was something they were talking about. Beginning of the year, they're dealing with just vacancies. So there's more that could probably be done on that front.
Yeah. Let's go ahead and let's move over to our guests, talk about the latest legislative session, the end of session. Megan Baer, ACSA Legislative Advocate, Dorothy Johnson, ACSA Legislative Advocate, both joining us here on the ACSA Legislative Lunch Break. Megan and Dorothy, so good to have you on the show today. This question is for both of you, and we'll start with Dorothy. Coming out of session, how do you think it went for school administrators and public education in general? Dorothy, we'll have you start.
Thanks so much, Naj. It's great to be here. And I'll say, as a former ACSA coalition partner and now as an ACSA team member in-house, the work that was done this year and still continues, I think, was fantastic. We were facing another year of unprecedented challenges, some amazing opportunities in the budget, and there's still 13 more days to go. So I don't want to, hang our hats up on a victory lap already. But overall, I think it's been a phenomenal year, and looking forward to sharing some of our wins so far with the audience in a little bit.
And Megan, your thoughts?
I would just echo what Dorothy said. We had a really great budget for public education. We're seeing increases to the base like we've never experienced before. The legislature listened to our members and our messages that we needed to invest in the programs we had. Please don't create, more programs. So we're feeling really good. And coming into this end of session push, we have a couple things we have our eyes on. But like Dorothy said, it's been, knock on wood, it's been a good year so far.
Megan, Dorothy, first of all, good to see you both. Thanks for joining us. Megan, I'll ask you this question. I know throughout the year transportation had been a big focal point, not only of yours, who you've been representing us very well on this issue, but it had been a big issue, I would say, in the school education, in the education policy space. I know there was a couple bills that you were specifically keeping an eye on. Can you give us an update? What happened there? What should our members know?
Yeah, so the beginning of the year started out in a very concerning place with transportation. We were looking at multiple proposals that proposed new mandates, unfunded mandates around ridership, around driver's requirements, around the kind of vehicles that could be used, all unfunded mandates, which, given the current state of homeschool transportation and the underfunding for decades, our membership was incredibly concerned about. I'm happy to say, we had a really good budget that invested a lot of money in the existing home to school transportation and didn't attach any new mandates to it. We also made some really good progress on a couple of bills. A mandate to transition completely to electric vehicles was stalled in a key fiscal committee. It was an unfunded mandate, and those vehicles cost about double currently as diesel vehicles. We also are really happy to say a bill that would have created all kinds of new requirements for anyone transporting students. So including for our van drivers, it would have required them to have a commercial driver's license. That bill was turned into a study bill to look at the barriers to becoming a school driver and what kind of things that we can do to increase the driver pool. So we're very happy how the transportation field has made a total 180 from where we started at the beginning of the year.
Let me make note of two things. Kenneth Durham asked for a link to that interview with LA Unified Superintendent. We've just put that into the chat. And if you have any questions for Megan and Dorothy, go ahead and put those into the chat as well. Dorothy, I want to ask you about Senate Bill 1131. This is the Safe at Home program. We have seen educators over these last couple of years, education leaders included, targeted during this pandemic. So I'm hoping you can explain a little bit about what this legislation will do.
Of course. So Senate Bill 1131 by Senator Newman extends an existing program that's been around for many years through the Secretary of State's office. And what it does is the current law helps protect public agency employees who might be targeted, harassed, threatened simply for carrying out their job duties on behalf of public agencies. And Naj, as you said, we know this has been carried over now to our education leaders. And so it keeps public records off of home addresses. So folks can go through this program and make sure that their home address so that their loved ones aren't necessarily as easily accessible, since we, again, regrettably have seen these targets move away from, the school campuses and into people's private homes. So we're pleased to be supporting this, and it's now on the assembly floor.
Megan, switching topics, school safety. I know that's also an issue given all the events that happen around the country. Anytime we had situations like we unfortunately did this year, not only this year, but in recent years, it does activate some activity in the Capitol. What were the bills that we were kind of prioritizing? What were the things you were keeping an eye on? What's the latest update on that front?
Yeah, of course, whenever there's something in the news, legislators get ideas, and sometimes they're great and sometimes they're really problematic. So one bill would have created a statewide hotline for tips, and it would have required every school district to dedicate numerous staff to all these different requirements. ACSA, we had a real concern because the vast majority of our districts already have anonymous tip lines, and we were really concerned that you're going to divert critical information away from the hands of local leaders who actually can act on it, and have a state department who doesn't have necessarily any connection to the community evaluating information. So, we raised a lot of concerns about that bill, and fortunately, it stalled. So districts are not going to be required to change their threat notification systems.
Edgar, did you notice how politically correct Megan was in answering at starting that, where she was like, sometimes they come up with really good stuff and sometimes they don't necessarily come up with really good stuff.
Hey, she's a professional there. She's like Dorothy said, we still have 13 days. Can't alienate them quite yet, you know?
That's right. That's right. Dorothy, we talked a little bit about CDC guidelines right at the top of the show, but I'm wondering if you could take us inside Senate Bill 1479 on COVID testing.
Yeah, happy to. So this was a bill that would have cost hundreds of millions in Prop 98 dollars for COVID testing, for plans, for staffing. But our colleague Stuart Kaminsky led a coalition of education management partners to amend the bill down significantly, so significantly actually that ACSA has removed our opposition. We had heard from our members that you want to get back to focusing on students and education and not these public health directives. So this bill was well intended, but just simply burdensome and possibly in conflict with some of the state guidance that has been evolving along with the pandemic. So now the bill simply requires districts to have a testing plan. No testing actually has to be completed, just a plan. And districts can adopt the state's framework or create their own plan that follows guidance. So kudos to Surette and her coalition for taking this possibly very expensive, cumbersome bill to a place where we're ready to work now.
Hey, Dorothy, let me jump in and ask you a question that Barbie asked, and it's somewhat related to what we were talking about, the shortages on the top of the show. The question was, how are retired educators being encouraged to help? And maybe those that don't have all the credentials. So it does get us to a bigger conversation about the flexibility the state gave last year. And maybe and that expired, and and it's not to say there hasn't been a lack of pushing, but give us an update and what's been the sentiment from what we know, whether it be in the Capitol or governor's office, what transpired after that executive authority went away.
Right. So you may recall that there was not just one executive order on staff shortages, but multiples, extending it, making it more flexible as we move through the year. And the administration, the legislature heard just how beneficial it was to bring retirees back to the classroom, having that expertise, that experience. And unfortunately, yes, it did expire with this 21-22 school year. And we have not heard of specific plans by the administration to bring back those forgivenesses, whether it was on 180-day sit out or the salary cap preventing retirees from being there for the full school year. But we are actively engaged with partners to see what we can do in the short term and the long term to really tap into this incredible resource that can be a huge benefit for our students, fellow teachers, and of course, the district overall.
Hey, Dorothy, let me ask you about two other items, probationary period and one on CalSTRS. What are the updates on those?
Well, both are good news, so I'm glad to share a report there. The first item related to probationary periods was Assembly Bill 2573, and this would have actually made sweeping changes to how credentialed employees earn service year credits and eventually, come on full time. And it also would have wiped out staffing flexibility for our small school districts, those with an ADA of less than 250. And luckily, this met the same fate of a similar bill. It was held on suspense. It will not be moving forward. And we're ready to push up our sleeves if this comes back again for a third time. The other good news relates to CalSTRS. It goes a long way, this bill, AB 1667 by Assemblymember Cooper. We're pleased to be supporting this with a broad coalition from labor, management, retirees. It's going to go a long way to help our district and retirees, current and future, prepare and plan with greater assurances. We sat down 2 years ago and started developing principles to promote accountability and reliability with STRS after hearing just some really tragic stories of accounting errors, basically upending people's plans for a healthy, secure retirement. And so we think this bill, AB 1667, is really going to be an insurance policy, again, for the districts and retirees. And we're just so pleased to see this on the Senate floor right now.
One last question for me. I know this time of year, as we mentioned the last couple of weeks, we're always kind of waiting for the other shoe to drop. If there's any surprises, if there's things that we hadn't talked about all year that next is, lo and behold, become, legislation. I know it makes our members nervous. Given, having said that, what are the things we're looking out for? Any surprises so far? Anything keeping us up at night? Megan, I'll start with you.
Right now, we're kind of on the lookout. The legislature hasn't come out with their trailer bill proposals publicly. So we are working the building and talking to members to make sure that there aren't any problematic proposals that pop up.
All right. Oh, Megan, Bear, Axel, do you have something more? I'm sorry.
I guess you don't want Dorothy.
Go ahead. Sorry, Dorothy.
Done, okay.
Sorry,
he's watching the clock.
I'm literally watching all of these comments. Please go. Don't worry about me.
Echo Megan's comments. We're in that, chasing rumors, getting information solidified. And then, we're already thinking about next year. What can we do to make things better for our students, our teachers, our members, whether it's mental health, whether it's staff shortages, whether it's continuing to navigate the COVID pandemic. And then also, if this recession materializes, what is that going to mean for our statewide association and all of our members? So Naj, I'll go ahead and kick it back to you. Thanks.
Okay. All right. So now I can thank both of you, Megan Bear, Dorothy Johnson, ACSA Legislative Advocates, member of our governmental relations team. Megan and Dorothy, thank you so much for being with us today. Edgar, let me recap a couple of things and get your thoughts on it. First off, let's talk about Your Mind First. This was our mental health focused show. It's on Tuesdays through the month of August here on ACSA Facebook and ACSA YouTube. It's our live and interactive show focused on mental health. Yesterday, we covered educator burnout. You had the opportunity, as I did, to watch the show. This the third installment in this series. Your thoughts, Edgar, as you were watching and hearing from the participants?
Yeah, well, first of all, Michael's doing a great job with the interviews, and I know it's a whole team effort there with your team, Naj, of just putting on this great series, which I think is a testament to. We've been talking about this a lot. I think getting some of our member perspectives about how they feel about some of these issues, whether it be their own wellness, student wellness. Obviously, we had the first partner on there a few weeks ago. So, I mean, my reflection from the conversation yesterday, it was telling. Like, you could almost hear the emotion coming out of some of our members' voices when they were recapping some of the struggles, right? About really what the toll that the last couple of years have taken, but then also, like, as enthusiastic as they are about the start of this year, that there's still some real challenges there, especially on the personnel front, especially on the not making sure we have enough bodies to serve our students. So I think it's a really important conversation, really piggybacks on some of the issues we were talking about today. And for those that haven't checked out the series, I'd really encourage them to go back and watch the episodes on any of our channels there.
Yeah, and a reminder that next week's show, again, this is Tuesdays, live and interactive here on ACSA Facebook and ACSA YouTube, 1 p.m. Next week, we will have part 2 of our Educator Burnout series with the Rand Corporation's lead researcher on the show. So don't forget to join us, Your Mind First, 1 p.m. Tuesdays here, ACSA Facebook and ACSA YouTube. Couple of other things for you. ACSA Leadership Summit. Edgar, we've mentioned it here a couple of times already. First week of November down in San Diego. It's a really, really great conference. Honestly, one of the best things that ACSA does all year long. Here's a preview. And if I remember those days correctly, Edgar, November 3rd through 5th in San Diego, you can learn more about ACSA's 2022 Leadership Summit, go to ACSA.org/professional-learning for more information. Also want to give you two other things. EdCal. If you've got great stories happening in your school district, on your school campus, go ahead and send photos, information to our EdCal editor, Michelle Carl at mcarl@axa.org. Get featured in EdCal. Also want to tell you about our new Resource Hub Digest. You can sign up for the Resource Hub Digest and get every toolkit, every explainer, research report, and guide delivered to your inbox once a month. Visit content.axa.org/subscribe for more information. I swear I felt like a car dealer at the end of that, Edgar, with so
Hey,
many.
you have a lot of stuff to, a lot of products to dish out there, but
Yeah.
good stuff. I really appreciate you trying to make things easier for our folks. We get educators, our members are extremely busy. I mean, broken records, preaching the choir here. They already know this, but we get how difficult it is. ACSA, we're trying to constantly put things out there that'll help our folks. I think finding ways to streamline that and make it easy for our folks to find, I think is always a good thing. So I'd encourage folks to subscribe there.
Yeah, absolutely. Folks, thanks so much for joining us today here on the live and interactive ACSA Legislative Lunch Break. We are back on Wednesdays, live and interactive at 1 p.m. here on ACSA Facebook and ACSA YouTube. Have a great rest of the day and rest of the week, and we'll see you next time.